Hello, good morning everyone, and welcome. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about programming Tableau with our APIs. My name is Alex Ross, and APIs are kind of a bit of a hobby of mine, so much so that my colleagues affectionately refer to me as the API guy. And I'm joined by my colleague Mike Pope, who's responsible for Tableau's technical documentation. So, unless you have an unhealthy interest in APIs like me, what brings you to this session? Have you ever tried to do stuff in Tableau that just feels too hard? For example, have you ever tried to connect to data on the web, but Tableau doesn't have a supported connector for? Or do you have on-premise data, which is stored in some kind of proprietary format that you want to analyze in Tableau? Perhaps you're a Tableau server admin, and you have to repeatedly perform tasks like setting up new sites, creating users, and defining their permissions over and over again. Or maybe you simply want to change one of your Tableau workbooks and point it at a different database server. Or if you're more creative, perhaps you want to take a Tableau viz, embed it in a web page, and do some fun stuff with it. If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you're in the right session, because Mike and I are about to show you how we can use our APIs to do all of this and much more as well. So let's talk about why we have APIs in Tableau at all. There are three key reasons why we have APIs. The first of those is to extend the functionality that Tableau provides out of the box. The second is about automating or scripting tasks that would otherwise be very tedious or repetitive in nature. And the third reason is to customize. This is about unleashing your creative side and starting to do things with Tableau that nobody else in the world has thought of doing before. Here's a list of the growing family of APIs that we have in Tableau today. We have the Document API, Extract API, JavaScript API, Mobile App Bootstrap, the REST API, and the Web Data Connector. When I joined Tableau 2 years ago, we actually only had two of these APIs, the Extract API and the JavaScript API. So that gives you an idea of how quickly we're adding APIs and improving our developer platform. Each of these APIs has its own purpose, so it's important to understand what each of them does to be able to pick the right tool for the job that you have. In order to demonstrate the power of our APIs, Mike and I would like to share with you a story about analyzing earthquake data. So many of you will know that Tableau is headquartered in Seattle. And someday there's going to be a big earthquake that's going to hit on the West Coast. Right. Over the next 50 years, there's going to be the biggest earthquake ever. And that got Mike and I a bit interested in earthquakes and wanting to learn more about them. So we wanted to know things like, how common are they? Where are they happening? How big are they? Of course, we can use Tableau to do this analysis, but we're going to need to use our APIs. And we're going to show you how. So in fact, the first API that we're going to use is our Web Data Connector. Let me show you. So in our search for getting data about earthquakes, Mike and I found the USGS website, who provide data feeds on every earthquake that's ever happened. The challenge with this, if I click on this data feed, is that it's not in a very human-readable format. It's actually in a JSON format, which isn't very easy to work with. So what Mike and I did was build a Web Data Connector that allows us to grab that, connect directly from Tableau to start doing our analysis. So if I jump into Tableau Desktop and choose the Web Data Connector, what I do is I paste in the URL of the Web Data Connector that Mike and I have already created. In this example, Mike and I created the Web Connector to allow the user to pick the date range in which they want to pull the earthquake data for. And if I hit this button to get the earthquake data, that's going to connect to the data feed that we just looked at on the USGS website and give us information about the data. Now, we've been adding a lot of new functionality to the Web Data Connector since it was first released, including we now give you the ability to define which fields in your data source are dimensions and which fields are measures. You can control what's continuous and discrete. And we've also added multi-table support. So where you are working with nested data like JSON, you can define different tables and then the end user can drag and drop those tables to join them together. Most recently, in version 10.1, which just came out last week, we introduced a concept called standard connectors. And what this means is that as the developer of the web connector, I can define how those multiple tables relate to each other and what the join keys should be. So my analysts and end users who are connecting don't need to understand the underlying schema of the data. They just drag out that standard connection, and away they go. So I'm going to pull that data down into Tableau, and now I can start doing my analysis. So if I drag the latitude and longitude into the viz, put the ID of the earthquake onto detail, and let's bring in the magnitude as well so we can see where the biggest earthquakes are taking place. And let's make the biggest ones orange. Here we go. Cool. So within a few clicks of the mouse, I've connected to the USGS data feed, pulled that into Tableau, and started to get some insight as to where these earthquakes are taking place, and especially the biggest ones. So today, Tableau provides over 40 different connectors for the most popular databases out of the box. I'm talking about platforms like SQL Server, Oracle, Google BigQuery, Amazon Redshift, and so on. These have been developed in close partnership with our technology vendors, with those technology vendors, to make sure that they're performant and tuned and give our customers the best user experience possible. But of course, there's always going to be additional data sources that you might want to connect to. They might not be niche to your organization, but when you look at the overall market, you have this long tail in green, which can start to be addressed through the Web Data Connector. And in fact, there's already a wide ecosystem of web data connectors that our customers and partners have developed. For the fitness fanatics, we have connectors for platforms like Runkeeper and Fitbit. For social media enthusiasts, we have connectors for Facebook and Twitter. And for people who are web scraping, we have connectors to tools like Import.io and Blockspring. What I've got on the screen here is really just a sample of what's available. I've written a few myself, so I've written connectors for Facebook and Twitter, which are on my blog, Tableau Junkie, if anybody wants to have a play around with them. So we've just looked at the end user experience of using a web data connector, but you're probably asking what's involved in actually creating one. The first thing you're going to need to do is write a web page and host that on a web server somewhere. That gives you the URL that you copy and paste into Tableau to connect to your web-based data. And of course, you're going to need to identify what is that web-based data that you're connecting to. Ideally, it would be some kind of RESTful web service in JSON format, which is exactly what we just looked at on the USGS website. But in fact, if you have an XML web service, or even just a table on an HTML page somewhere, you can use the Web Data Connector to connect to that directly from Tableau. You're also going to need to download the Web Data Connector software development kit. This is available from the Tableau developer website, and it includes a simulator that's going to help you to build and debug your web data connector, as well as samples to get you going. Part of that software development kit is a JavaScript library that you're going to need to reference in your web data connector. Make sure you grab the latest version. Currently, that's version 2.1. And finally, you are going to need some JavaScript skills. So if you do have a web programming background at all, that's going to be fantastic. But you don't need to be an expert programmer. I'm certainly not one, and I think we've done a really nice job in Tableau of building the web connector in such a way that abstracts a lot of the complexity and makes it simple to build new web connectors. So here are a few related sessions if you're interested in going deeper on the web connector. For those of you that are new to the web connector, there's a session on writing your first web connector. For those of you who are already using the web data connector, you might consider attending the session on advanced web data connector topics. There's also another session on data prep for Tableau with JavaScript. And finally, some of our devs on Thursday at 12 will be on stage talking about wrangling cloud data, and part of that will be focusing on the web data connector as well. Definitely check your apps to make sure that you're aware when those sessions are happening and where they're taking place as well. OK. So as it turns out, the USGS API that we've connected to only provides the latitude and longitude of the earthquakes. But Mike and I really wanted to know which countries and states were most prone to earthquakes, especially the big ones. And to answer that question, we're going to look at the extract API. So to perform our analysis at the country and state level, that meant that we had to do some reverse geocoding of the latitude and longitudes that the USGS gave us. So what we first did is we loaded our earthquake data into a SQL Server data warehouse. The web data connector is great for connecting to data feeds, but it's never going to replace the need for a robust, scalable, analytical warehouse like SQL Server. We then wrote some integration code that pulled down the latitude and longitude from SQL Server and passed it up to the Google Maps API. The Google Maps API then gave us back the country and state information of where that earthquake took place. And finally, our integration code made use of the extract API to generate a TDE file ready for our analysis. Let's take a look. Okay. So we actually chose to write this integration code in Python. If I go ahead and run this guy, what this is going to do is it's going to connect to my SQL Server data warehouse, and it's going to start iterating through each of those earthquake events, sending it up to the Google Maps API, and get the address data back. And what we're now seeing on the screen is each of those earthquakes. We can see the ID of the earthquake, as well as the address that's coming back from the Google Maps API. And if I open up my File Explorer, we can see that this code is generating a brand new Tableau data extract file ready for our analysis. I'm not going to sit here and wait for the whole thing to finish. I'm just going to kill that and jump into a version that I'd pre-created. But what you'll now see is that our Tableau data extract file includes the country and the state that was missing from the USGS data feed. So now if I want to, I can start doing some analysis at the state level. I'm going to drag out the country. Let's look at the state as well. Let's look at the number of earthquakes that are taking place in each of those states. And where's my state gone? And let's filter on the country as well. So let's just focus on the US. There we go. Maybe put some labels on. Okay. So based on this extract that has 500 earthquake events, we can start doing some analysis of which states in the US that had the epicenter of that earthquake. Clearly, there's a lot on the West Coast. No surprises there. Interestingly, there's one in Texas. Probably wasn't expecting that. Okay, so why did we use the extract API to do this? First of all, the extract API gives you total control over your data. There's lots of scenarios where you might want to connect to some proprietary data, for example, that doesn't support ODBC and Tableau doesn't have a connector for. Or maybe you want to integrate data coming from multiple data sources, which is exactly what we just did. We pulled data from SQL Server and the Google Maps API and then pushed both of those pieces of information into a single extract file. The second reason for using the extract API is you can run it anywhere. You can run it on Windows, Mac, Linux, and you don't even need Tableau to be installed to run your code. And the third reason is that we provide you a choice of programming environment with the extract API. It's available in Python, Java, C, and C++, and there's also wrappers that have been written by people in the community for other programming languages like C#. So here's what you're going to need if you want to make use of our extract API. Obviously, you're going to need some data that you want to push into the Tableau data extract. In our case, that was the SQL Server and Google Maps API. You're going to need some programming skills in one of those programming languages that we offer the extract API in. And you're going to need the extract API from our websites. And finally, you're going to need the development platform or tool of your choice. Some kind of IDE environment like PyCharm, Eclipse, Visual Studio, or for you hardcore programmers, Notepad or VI. Cool. So if you're interested in learning more about the extract API, there's a session which is being repeated on Tuesday and Wednesday being run by a colleague of mine, Eric Hannell. So again, yeah, if you want to go deeper and learn more about using the Extract API, I would definitely encourage you to go and attend that one. So we've just seen how we can use the Extract API to generate a TDE file that contains the country and state information that Mike needed for our analysis. We're now ready to share this workbook with our colleagues. I'm going to hand over to Mike, who's going to talk about another API that allows us to do just that.
Hello, everybody. All right, so the scenario so far, of course, is we have these extracts. What we've done is people have loaded these extracts onto two servers, onto a test server, which is what Alex was showing you earlier, and then onto a production server. We'll come back to that in a minute. I wanted to share, well, actually, I have this is mine. So we've created bunches of these visualizations while we've been working on this stuff. So you saw one that Alex just made a second ago, but we've been playing around with these things for weeks. So we've made all kinds of these. And of course, I want to be sharing these with my colleagues. The way to share them with your colleagues is to put them on Tableau server, Tableau online, whatever. So the situation that we have where I work is that we have Tableau server running on virtual machines, on VMs. And periodically, those get recycled. So there goes my server, there goes my data, there go my users, there goes everything, right? So, of course, I want to reconstitute all of this stuff. And I bet that you can guess, since you're in an API session, how I'm going to do this. I'm going to use the REST API and the Tableau server client library. So let me show you, give you kind of a preview of how we would do this. So I have a script here that I'm going to run. I'm not going to talk about it very much. I'm just going to run it right now. And it literally takes longer to talk about what it did than what it actually has done. So let me tell you what I just did. I have a brand new server constituted on a VM. It's quite blank. What I've done is I've created a new site called TC16 on this thing. I've created 5 users on it. I've added passwords to them. And I published a workbook up to that server. And I did all that literally while you saw that, the last 3-4 seconds or whatever. And I'm not really asking you to focus on the code. What I'm kind of conveying to you is that in the course of doing a very quick script, I managed to constitute a server that was blank before. So let me go show you, if I can find Chrome. I have to find Chrome in order to show you this. All right. Sorry for breathing so loud. All right, so here's a TC16 site that I just created, and I have these 5 users that I just created. Notice that one of the things I set as part of creating the users was to set the site role for them. And then there is a viz that I just published. Again, you saw it took just a few seconds, and here is that viz. Whoops. All right, there we go. So this is earthquakes of magnitude 3.5 and higher for 2 months worth of. So we'll come back and visit that in just a minute. All right, so very easy to do, obviously. Let me come back, sort of back up a little bit and tell you about the REST API. So what does the REST API do? So the easy way for us to think of it is that it's 3 Ps. It allows you to provision, it manages permissions, and it manages publishing. Let me be a little more specific than that. For provisioning, what we mean is that you can manage, that is, you can create, delete, manage sites, projects, users, groups, schedules, jobs, all that sort of stuff. You can manage content. You can manage permissions, so on the default project permissions and permissions on workbooks and data sources. You can manage through the REST API, and then finally, you can publish. You can publish data sources, you can publish workbooks using the REST API. So many of you have probably used REST APIs, but I'm going to give you like 1 slide's worth of how REST APIs are going to work. REST APIs fundamentally are going to be about HTTP requests and responses. They're an API that runs over the web, essentially. Slight simplifications here. So this will give you kind of an idea of what we're looking at. There's 3 components. There's a verb, an HTTP verb. In this case, it's going to be post. There is a URI, or sometimes they call them endpoints, which indicates the thing that you want to do the verb to, the content that you want to work with. And in many cases, there's going to be a a payload or the body will have the request body will have information in it, which in this case is going to be an XML, that tells the system what you want to do. So to kind of give you an idea, if you send this XML block to this URI, so notice that this is the API 2.3 sites, should be an S on the other side, sites endpoint on your Tableau server, and you send that request as a post verb, it will create a new site called marketing site. So you send this content to that endpoint on your server as a post request, you'll get a new site. So the REST API supports what in the database world is referred to as CRUD operations. Sometimes you can create new content using a post verb. Sorry if you can't see this. You can read content using the get verb, if you all are HTTP people. You can update content by using the put verb, and you can delete content using the delete verb, needless to say. So 4 operations essentially, 4 HTTP verbs, and then an endpoint, and most of the time you send content and then get content back from the server. So that's REST API in a nutshell. But I'm actually going to take a little bit of a detour here because what I really want to talk about is the Tableau Server Client Library. So we have this REST API. The REST API gives you this low-level-ish access to managing content on Tableau Server. And by low level, I mean HTTP request level, okay? We have about 90 endpoints right now to manage all different kinds of content on the server, like I was saying earlier, sites and projects and users and groups and putting users in groups and all that stuff. The beauty of the REST API is it is completely language agnostic. Any language that you can make HTTP requests in, you can send REST API requests in. And there's nothing to download. You just send the request. Now we have this new thing, the Tableau Server Client Library. And when I say new thing, I mean we're at version 0.2. So new is new. What that does is it wraps the REST API. And particularly what it does is the idea of the Server Client Library is that it manages a lot of the mechanical aspects of doing REST API calls. So to do REST API calls, you have to send the request and get the response. You have to manage the payload. And you saw that there was a little piece of XML, so you would have to create the XML, or conversely, you would have to parse the XML on the way back. One of the things you have to do with the REST API is you have to sign in, and then you have to kind of manage the authentication token in one of the headers. Anyway, it's not like it's hard, it's just like it's tedium. So the Tableau Server Client Library manages all that stuff for you. It just sort of deals with the infrastructure and lets you focus on the specific aspects, the task essentially that you want to do. At this moment, remember I said it's just version 0.2. It's implemented most of the REST API, and I mean literally as we speak, they are like banging away, adding more and more functionality to it. And then the 4th P of the REST API, this is my not funny joke, is that it is written in Python. So at the moment, the Tableau Server Client Library is available in Python. But hold that thought, because we'll come back to it in a minute. I'm not going to give you a bunch of code, but I wanted to focus for you very rapidly on what actually it looks like to do something in the Server Client Library. Basically, you have a username and a password, and you create yourself an authentication object. You have a server URL, and you create yourself a server object. And then you sign in, and then you, as it says here, do stuff. So you do stuff like you create a site, or you create a user, or you do something like that. And we're talking here about like 3 and 4 lines of code. So it's very compact to do these sorts of things. The script I ran, which created sites and users and so forth, ran, if I took out all the commenting cruft and stuff like that, was just under 50 lines. The equivalent code in the REST API kind of raw would be around 250 lines. So it's just, it compacts away a lot of the stuff that you would have to do over and over in the REST API. But either way, whether you choose to use the Server Client Library or the REST API directly, you're getting that functionality of being able to manage the content directly, programmatically. All right, so what do you need in order to do the REST API? Well, you're going to need Tableau Server, and that means on an on-prem Tableau server, if you've got that, or you can use Tableau online if you're working with that. And you need to be able to log into that server. You need to have credentials for someone who can log in either as a server admin or as a site admin. So, of course, if you log in as a server admin, you can do anything. And then many of the things that you can do are site admin specific. Then, if you're using the REST API, you just have to have a programming language that supports HTTP. And I'm not aware of a programming language that doesn't support HTTP requests right now. So probably do that in COBOL, right? And you need the Tableau Server Client Library if you want to use that. So that, again, this is brand new. It's written in Python. If you are a Python person, there's a pip install that you can use, or you can go to our GitHub site and clone the repo or download the code. The GitHub stuff, I don't know if anybody said this so far, but the GitHub stuff is all open source. So it's all out there for you to look at, to download, to send pull requests to, etc. And then you need Python skills. Although, as Alex was saying earlier about JavaScript and the WDC, the skills don't have to be extensive. We've got samples out there that show you how to do sort of the basic things in the Tableau Server Client Library. And I just used those as the basis for the scripting that I needed to do. And I put a little asterisk here by Python skills because, I've said this like 3 times now, it's written initially in Python, but we're actually also working on a Java version and a JavaScript version. And we would really like to hear from you about what languages it would be useful to have this Tableau Server Client Library. So, all right. There are some sessions about the REST API. The automating the hard stuff is going to be, so I showed you a couple of sort of trivial examples here, you know, creating a site, creating a user. There's much more interesting things you can do with the REST API. That'll be 2 times, and then the custom portal is interesting because it's going to combine the REST API with some other of the APIs I want to talk about. So it's an integration scenario that might be interesting to you. And then this great, there's always rest for the wicked. I love that title. As Alex was saying earlier, make sure that you check your app because stuff has been moving around. And so if you're interested in any of these things, by all means, please check them out. And so here we are. Got extracts, they got put up on the server. And then I provisioned a server to have users on it, to have a site where my colleagues can also be sharing these items. I mentioned at the beginning that we were putting all our stuff, or we were pointing to stuff that's on a test server. So at some point, we're going to need to change that, and Alex is going to tell you how we do that.
So as Mike said, we've published our workbook data source as well up to a test Tableau server environment. Has anybody here ever looked at the XML that sits behind a Tableau workbook or a Tableau data source? Yeah, lots of hands. Good. Well, if you have, then you'll know that it is just an XML file, which looks like this. So this is actually the viz that we built earlier, the earthquakes by state. This is the XML behind it. And what you'll notice is that there are properties in this XML, like the name of the data source, the name of the database that we're connecting to, and the server. In this case, it's my local machine. Now, people who have inspected the XML like this start to want to make changes to it. And this is a phenomenon that's known in our community as XML hacking. Well, there's good news because the document API means there should be no more XML hacking. It provides you with a supported and programmatic way of updating your Tableau workbook and Tableau data source files. So if you have been modifying XML manually or scripting to do that, the document API is definitely the one for you. So let me go back to my viz. This one here. So this version of our visualization is currently pointing at a test data source, right, that only has 500 earthquake records in it. We've built our viz, and we've published up to our test environment, and we're happy with what we have, and we want to now migrate this over to our production Tableau server environment. But in order to do that, I need to switch out the data source to point at the production version of my data source. So we're going to use the document API now to do exactly that. So I won't show too much code again, but what you'll see is that with a handful of lines of code, I think I've got 3 or 4 lines of code, I can open up that workbook, I can modify the data source that it's pointing at, and I can then save a copy of that workbook as the productionized version. So if I go to the folder where we're going to run this code, So what you'll notice at the moment is we just have our test version of the Tableau workbook. We run the code, and we now have the production version that's just been generated. So let's open this guy up in Tableau Desktop. And we've got exactly the same viz, but it's now pointing at our production database. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some other use cases where you might consider using the document API. The first one is what we've just seen. It's allowing you to switch the underlying data source in your Tableau workbook. Probably the most common use case I see for this is customers moving between different Tableau server instances or possibly different sites on the same Tableau server. The second example, and Mike and I were having a conversation with someone just before the session about exactly this use case, is where you are working with many of your customers, each of whom has their own separate database instance. If each of those database instances shares the same schema, you might have a single kind of master workbook that you want to replicate and implement for all of your customers. The document API is going to allow you to do that programmatically. And the third use case is that you can combine the document API with the Tableau server client library that Mike just showed to do some magic and be a bit more creative. For example, you might have an end-to-end controlled release process for your Tableau content. So what I mean by that is we would publish a workbook up to our test server. We would use the Tableau server client library to pull that down, use the document API to switch out the data source from test to production, and then use the Tableau server client library again to push it back up, the production version back up to our production server. So what are you going to need to use the document API? Well, obviously, you're going to need a Tableau workbook or a Tableau data source that you want to modify. The most recent version of the document API allows you to work directly with packaged workbooks and packaged data sources as well. You're going to need to download and install the document API. Again, this is in Python at the moment, so you can do a pip install Tableau document API, and that will install the library in your Python environment. And you're going to need some Python programming skills. Now, the document API is also very new. I think the first release was in June, and we are adding more features, more capabilities to it all the time. And we'd love to hear from you what you see your use cases being for this, to understand how you would like to use the document API and what functionality you would like to see evolve into the API. So for all you XML hackers, this is a session for you to go to. It's being repeated on Wednesday and Thursday about bringing you back from the dark side of XML hacking. Okay, so I've just shown you how we can use the document API to have our Tableau workbook point at the production version of our data source. And now we have our production-ready workbook. We want to embed this in a website. And Mike's going to talk about how we can use the JavaScript API to do that.
Thanks, Alex. All right, as Alex was saying, we've done these things so far. We've gotten data using Web Data Connector. We've created extracts. We've provisioned a server. And then we've been able to swap the data sources that a workbook has been pointing to. So, sorry, I am advised that you cannot hear me. How sad. Okay. So you can share data with your colleagues on Tableau Server. You can even publish it up to public or something like that. And as we know, vizzes are interactive. You can have filters on them and other things. So there are many scenarios in which maybe you don't want to either point people at your Tableau server because it's not practical, or because maybe that's not a great interface for them, or because it's, maybe you don't want people, when Alex was showing the viz he worked on earlier, he added country and state. So how many countries would have been on that filter? Maybe 140 or something like that. And you don't want to say to people, yeah, just go to the 15th country on that filter and choose that one. So what you can do instead is you can embed a viz in an HTML page, in a web page that you create, and then you can use the JavaScript API to manipulate the viz directly. So you've got a viz on there that has all the features that the viz normally has, but in addition to that, you can manipulate what's going on inside the viz, and conversely, you can respond to events that happen in there. So let me Let me show you a demo, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about what we've done. All right, so I'm going to refresh this, and I hope I'm going to refresh it. There we go. All right, so I'm loading a viz here. This is a viz that hopefully looks a little bit familiar because we looked at it a little bit earlier. And this is a web page in which this is not a very pretty web page. I'll be the first to tell you that. Okay, so this is, what I've done though is I've put various features on here just to be able to illustrate what I'm doing. So one of the things I said, for example, is that, well, let me back up and say, we have a viz loaded here that was dynamically loaded into the page. Now I've added code into the page to do a variety of things. I'm going to walk through those with you. For example, I want to tell people, oh, let's be able to look at magnitudes of earthquakes in different ranges. So I just used a normal HTML dropdown and some Java code, and I'm able to influence the, whoa, what did I do? Okay, influence it that way, or maybe I want to focus on just these. So again, these are filters that you could potentially build into the viz, but I have direct control here over what filters are available to people, and I can use familiar controls for them. I can do it a different way. I can say, oh, let's focus on all the, well, let me bring back all the magnitudes, I guess. Let's focus on all the earthquakes in California. So this is setting a filter, but I'm doing it just out of a link on the page, or Alaska, or everybody's favorite, Oklahoma. What? There are earthquakes in Oklahoma? Yes, there are. So, all right, come back here. So you can do other things. I was just playing around with this. This made me laugh. I thought, you know, this is a pattern on this map that looks a little bit familiar. So I went out and found a map of tectonic plates. And I decided, what if I superimposed that on these list of earthquakes? And I think, let me see, I think I have to adjust this a little bit. There we go. All right, so I don't know if you can see this way back in the back, but it looks like there's a tremendous overlap between earthquake activity and tectonic plates. And I'm not really teaching you about earthquakes here. What I'm teaching you about is I took a map and I superimposed it on top of the viz as part of a potential educational experience for people who are looking at this page. Right? Something else I did, so these are all setting filters and doing things that I'm starting in the JavaScript code and I'm doing something to the viz. I can do the reverse. I can, for example, select some marks and then pipe that information out to JavaScript. So what I've done here is I've selected marks. And obviously, you can do this inside of the viz as well. But what happens is it gives you the mark information to do with whatever you want. So I'm not doing something particularly astounding here, but what I did do is I used jQuery to create a little dialog box that gives me summary information about those marks and includes links out to the USGS site for any individual, well, I'm going to have to close this, aren't I? Any individual earthquake that you happen to choose. All right, so something else, and this is a relatively new feature of the JavaScript API, is that you can get the data that underlies the visualization. So there's 1,247 marks on this map that represent that many earthquakes. I can call a JavaScript function that gets that data and just gives it to me in JavaScript. And then I'm like free to do with it whatever I want. So, and people have done some really cool things. So just as kind of an illustration of something you could do is the colleague who sits behind me at work, directly behind me, is like a super map nerd guy. And he has all these cool JavaScript libraries for working with maps. And he said, oh, you should do this. So I did this. What I did is I got the data, and then I passed it to a kind of 3D visualization library. So I've got this globe here that takes those same 1,247 marks and populates them on the globe. So yeah, I don't know that this is a particularly awesome way to look at earthquakes, but I thought it was a cool thing to do with the data that I got back. So that's, again, what I'm doing there is I'm taking the data from the underlying viz in JavaScript, and then I'm just sending it to a different library for that library to create a visualization that I think we can agree is not something you definitely get out of Tableau. So that would be an example of both extending Tableau functionality and some level of creativity, although I don't credit myself with much creativity on these things. All right, so JavaScript API. Let's go back to the slideshow. All right, so why do we have the JavaScript API? As you know, you can already embed vizzes into pages. You can get the embed code from Tableau server. What we can add with the JavaScript API, in a word, is bidirectional interaction. I can influence the viz in JavaScript, and conversely, I can respond to events in the viz. And then from that point, it's entirely free. I'm entirely free to do whatever I can do in JavaScript. This is sort of an illustration of how it works. Starting with the fact that you load the viz dynamically. So I call code to load a viz. It goes up to server, brings the viz down, and it sticks it into, as it happens, it sticks it into a div element. I specify the div element I wanted to put it in, and it just embeds an iframe in there, and I'm ready to go. What I was illustrating to you earlier is I can do some gesture on the page. Maybe I click a button, which calls code to set a filter, and then I use the JavaScript API to do a filter setting in the viz. Conversely, as we were saying, you can click a mark and then respond to the mark selection event, and gives you the data of the marks that you have selected, and you can do whatever you want with. And then finally, as I said, you can get the underlying data from this. So these are the kind of the basic functionality of what you can do. What do you need in order to use the JavaScript API? Well, you've got to have a visualization on a server, on-prem, online. You have an HTML page that you write, of course, and then you have to have the JavaScript library, which we're currently at version 2.x. And that's available, if you've got Tableau server, it's on your server, or you can get it from online or from public. And then you have to have some JavaScript skills. And to emphasize what Alex has said earlier, you do not have to be an expert programmer for all of these things. We are not developers, and we can do these things, so I reckon anybody can do these things. All right, what else? So what else can you do? You can resize things, you can create custom views, you can export images, animate vizzes. Basically, a lot of the functionality that you get in the server UI, you can do in the JavaScript API. Does that make sense? So most of the stuff that you can do in Tableau server, you can emulate using the JavaScript API and other web pages. The kinds of things that people do with it, for example, is they create portals. Portals is a good example, and I mentioned earlier there was a sample that, a session that combined different APIs, and this is an example where rather than, as I said, sending your, finance VP to your Tableau server and say, hey, go look at our vizzes, you can create a portal that has exactly the information on it that they need in a format that makes more sense to them. People have done games, which is really amazing to me. And then kind of my personal favorite is the chat app where somebody puts a viz in a page and then multiple people can be looking at the page at the same time and interacting with the viz and chatting with each other at the same time. And I'm not saying that this is something you have to do every day, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of things that you can do with a viz and extending it with JavaScript. Okay, so there's a bunch of sessions at TC this year about the JavaScript API, but I just want to give you an idea. Like, for example, at 3.15, there's this embed filter, and then what? So I've showed you basic functionality of the JavaScript API, so that's going to sort of take that as a starting point, and then. Let's talk offline, but you do have to have, you need to have access to it, right? You have to have permissions for that person to be able to use it. Does that make sense? That person has to have permissions to use it, right? But it's a setting on the workbook. And then there's another one. Again, check your app on the developer track, or this slideshow will be available to you later if you want to go through these in more detail. So that's the end of the story for the APIs as we want to talk about them today. WDC. Extract API, server client library, which is a wrapper on the REST API, as we said earlier, document API to change data sources, and then finally the JavaScript API to manipulate vizzes in custom ways. All right, this is the list of APIs. To repeat what we said earlier, in the order that we showed you, the only one that we didn't talk about is the mobile app Bootstrap, which is sort of outside the scope of our expertise right now. I'll give you a second if you want to take a picture. Good? All right. So let's go back. Why are you using APIs? You want to extend what Tableau can already do. So you need some functionality that Tableau doesn't offer out of the box. You can use the APIs to implement that. You can automate a lot of tasks. Alex had a good use case where you wanted to combine APIs to do, what was the term you used?
Controlled release process.
Controlled release process, right? Okay. Or you want to customize, you want to create a complete customized experience for your users. So that's what the APIs can do for you. So a couple announcements, sort of. We had a hackathon all day yesterday, like from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, where people were creating projects using any combination of the APIs that they wanted. The finalists for that are going to be tonight at 6:30, right after the devs on stage. And the cool thing is people are going to present, the top 3 finalists are going to present, and audience applause will determine the winner. So if you have a partisan interest in anybody's hackathon project, by all means, show up. Big prize, $1,000, big check, 4 feet wide. And that is going to be over in the ACC. All right, some resources for you all. We have, if you are a Python person or a Node/JavaScript person, you can run these commands. They will install a set of utilities, the TC16 utilities. You then run the TC16 command, and it will get you all the stuff that we talk about at TC, and then there's some other secret cool stuff that you will definitely want to do. And if you do this, you will definitely want to do it soon. There's an Easter egg in there that is time sensitive, so get on it right away. All right. We have your first place to start with any of this API stuff is the developers.tableau.com, the portal. That's the entry point into everything else. We have a GitHub site for most but not all of our APIs right now. So github.com/Tableau. So if you don't have to remember that much. Remember developers.tableau.com and github.com/Tableau. So those are your 2 entry points into all the information that we've got. We also have a set of videos on YouTube. Hashmark data dev to find those, and there's a bunches of them. So have a look there. And then a couple of things that we actually wanted to talk about. One of them is that all of the sessions on the dev track, all of them, are being put onto a Dropbox folder that you can download, as far as I know, the slideshows and all the code and everything. Here's the problem. We don't actually know that folder name, but we are awaiting information from our leader. We will find that out for you, or any of the dev track sessions, you should be able to say, where is that Dropbox folder? So if you want any of that. I think that was it, right? Okay, so there's a survey, fill that out so we can be better next time. And I guess we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, go.
For get data, does it return the filters that are applied that will filter the data?
Does it come pre-filtered? I believe it does, yes. But I am not going to totally commit to that answer. I think I was discovering that it was doing that, yes. Yes, sir.
Do you have to have a Tableau desktop installed for the document API?
You do not need to have any Tableau running to use the document API. You just pip install that library and away you go.
Maybe you already answered this. When you get that selected data, or you get that underlying data, when you pull down the underlying data, can you get that filtered by how it's already filtered?
Yes, he's just asking. I want to say that it is filtered, but I'm not going to totally commit to that. But if you want to talk to us offline, we can certainly try it. All right? Yeah, good. Like a batch command to do that? No.
Mike, can you just repeat the question?
Sorry, the question was, is there a bulk/batch command in the REST API to create users? And no. Answer no. Sorry. Wait, sorry. Extract API, can you refresh and extract? You can't do it on the server. Is that what you're asking? Right. Right.
Correct. So the extract API does not allow you to refresh a published extract on Tableau server. You need to use tab command to do that at the moment.
Okay.
I have certainly spoken
the guy to talk to is Ben Lauer.
Yes. I have spoken to our dev team about that. I've definitely seen a lot of customers who would want to do that. But yeah, Ben Lauer is the guy to speak to. He heads up our extensibility platform.
Right.
Question at the front?
Can you get embedded code from Tableau client API?
The question is, can you...
Tableau server library. Can you get embedded code from Tableau server client?
The embedded code for which API?
From Tableau server client library.
What do you mean embedded code?
Not in JavaScript API, but we're using Python to modify embedded code.
So the Tableau server client library is written in Python.
No, I want to get this to using my JavaScript library, not using your. Can I get other way to get embedded code from Tableau server?
I see. So the question is about how we get the embedded code from Tableau server. The JavaScript API is the way.
Got it.
So I've worked with other customers who are using other technologies that don't play nice with JavaScript. So that I've definitely seen customers who want other ways of embedding vizzes within their applications other than JavaScript. Today, the JavaScript API is the way to do that. For anybody who's developing mobile apps, the new mobile app Bootstrap, which we didn't talk about, is aimed at people natively embedding Tableau visualizations within mobile apps. But yeah, if you're I'm happy to talk to you in more detail about your use case.
Yeah.
Yep. Question?
Going back to the get data, is there any way to either filter out what columns or reformat the get data?
It just gives it to you in a huge old JSON chunk, so you can do whatever you want with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Are there any plans to distribute the JavaScript APIs in a Gem package?
Do not know. So
Can you get who has access to what you use on the server on the rest
yes, you can query permission. Sorry, thank you. The question was, can you find out who has access to views on the server using the REST API? And yes, you can query permissions.
Just to clarify, were you asking who has access or how many times things have been accessed?
What views you have access
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes.
Currently, your extract API only works with Python 2.7. Does not support Python 3.5 yet.
Correct. Sorry, yes.
And also in Linux, the Linux version has an issue where it won't connect to an SSL server.
Okay.
Any idea of when that is?
Actually, the whole 3.x thing with Python was under serious discussion last night at the hackathon. So yeah, it's a well-known request, right? But the more times we hear it, the faster they'll get on it. So the question was the SDK, the extract API currently is only Python 2.7. So
And also the SSL bug. Do you have any idea when that?
that one I don't know about. And unfortunately, the extract API is not one of the things that's on GitHub, so you can't just like file issues, right? So you have to go through the more normal channels for filing a bug, right? But definitely do that. So, okay.
which version of the workbook has supported on Docker APIs? Is it 2010 or like 9.3, 9.2?
I actually don't know off the top of my head how far back we go. I know definitely 9 and 10 are fine. I don't know if we go back further. So if you can give me your contact details, I can follow up. Thank you.
Any idea of a time frame when those Python libraries will go to JavaScript?
So the question, yeah, when server client library will be Java and JavaScript, right? Real soon now, as they used to say. I mean, they're working on them now, right? So, but again, the more we hear, that bumps it up the queue, the priority queue.
Things like that, are they going to be available as open source projects? So you contribute?
Yeah, anything that's on GitHub will be, so I don't know what this, yeah, you can always file pull requests. So yeah, they may not take them, but you can file pull requests. So the question was, yeah, so anything that's on GitHub is considered open source as far as we're concerned, right? And the code is there and you're free to file pull requests. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah. Bye.